favorite girl, April Watts. Welcome to another edition of Ego. That's Everybody's Got One. It's a podcast about opinions. And I am super excited about tonight's topic as well as my guests. I'm going to introduce everybody and allow them to introduce themselves before I tell you what the topic is. First, in studio, we have Eric McKinley King. That is like my dude. I put your whole name out there. Okay. I've known him most of my adult life, and he is the owner of 100 Proof Strategies and the founder of the Just Us PAC. Joining us via Zoom, we have my girl, Tori Rose. She is a phenomenal woman, first and foremost. She's a motivational speaker, a community leader, and an educator. And last but certainly not least, one of my favorite people, man, Mr. Quincey Gamble. He's a political strategist, communicator, and problem solver. That is what he does. So what I would like you guys to do is to explain to the Ego audience exactly what it is you do. Starting with you, Eric.
Okay, well, I am probably the odd man out in that I started in, well, I'm known for being in hospitality. That's my bread and butter, so to speak. But before that, which was many, many years ago, I started in local political advocacy in Washington, D.C. And I've not ever let go of the rabble-rouser that lives within me. So just recently, as a result of a whole host of things, but most importantly, this upcoming election and this current administration, I decided to, for the first time, launch a political action committee, which I did. I filed on Juneteenth historically, and awesome. We're getting that off the ground. So I'm here and excited to talk about voter registration and all things associated with that.
All righty, Ms. Tori.
All right, so again, thank you so much for having me. I'm Tori Rose, the Connector, Baltimore born and raised, West Side certified, West Side.
All right.
I am a connector. I actually call myself the Connector, but I believe everyone has the ability to connect. The idea of actually connecting came about a few years ago when friends of mine would jokingly say, if you need a horse, call Tori. You need a whale, call Tori. Whatever you need, call Tori. What I realized I had was the ability to index and Rolodex the resources in our communities. And no different than what we see in the Upper Park Heights area. In our Jewish communities, our brothers and sisters know where to go to get what they need. When I looked around, especially where I was in West Baltimore, we didn't have anyone who was connecting resources to people. And so I started actively acting as the connector, helping build what I like to call a Black Angie's List. And so awesome. That's how the connector started. Many of you guys know that I ran for city council in this upcoming, or this most recent, I should say, election. I came in second, but I was the only woman on the ballot. And I'm excited even to talk about that dynamic that says in Baltimore City, where there is, 60+% African-American city, more women voting than men, a woman on the ballot who is more than qualified still came in second. So I hope to be able to talk about my opinion and actually bring some light to what it looks like in this upcoming election in November for women to vote, for us all to vote, and what our vote actually will impact. So again, awesome. Thanks for having me.
All right, Q.
Hey, good evening. It's a blessing to be with each of you. I'll just say I'm just your all-around political hack, and I've served in a myriad of roles within progressive politics, but ultimately I'm committed to making things better for my community, for Black people, and my vehicle of choice is mostly politics. But I'm just your hack, so that's good enough. It's a blessing to be here.
It's a blessing to definitely have you, because even though you don't want to brag on yourself, you have done some amazing things, and I'm very proud of you as an African-American man to have been in some of the rooms and have strategized for some of the biggest names in politics. That's just like motivating, it's inspiring, and it's definitely something that I wish you would talk about, but I'm not going to talk about it if you don't want to talk about it. Let's get into today's topic. We are talking Decision 2020, and does your vote really count? And the reason that I want to talk about that is because, especially in the African American community, there is a big debate about whether or not our vote really counts. You have a lot of people that are disillusioned, they are frustrated, and a lot of us don't get out to vote. And this current election is very, very crucial. It's very, very pivotal. And so I just want to know, do you believe that your vote really counts? And you can jump in wherever you feel necessary.
Okay. Do you mind if ladies go first?
Go ahead, Tori.
Absolutely, I hope so.
Awesome. So I want to just kind of lead with saying I do have a degree in political science, right? But I don't at all call myself a political guru. And I, at a later time, we'll talk about why the political science study of this politics is important. But I think that we should take into account that it just is not true when we say that blacks do not want to vote, or that blacks and African Americans don't show up to vote. There are so many different reports and studies that will show you that blacks are more. It is harder for me to vote in this country as a black woman. It is harder for you all as black men to vote in this country, especially the way blacks are systematically denied the ability to vote. In our communities, when even right now we saw mailboxes in the primary election being removed from certain communities. We saw people who had disabilities and needed special accommodations not being met, their accommodations not being met by the local board of elections.
I don't want to cut you off, but I want to talk about voter suppression. I just didn't want to talk about it right now. So I really want to talk about, does your vote really count? Does it count?
Does the vote count? Simple answer, yes.
Okay. Quincy?
I will say undoubtedly our vote counts, and I think it's important that we realize that the privilege of to vote was not given to us. It's something that our foremothers and our forefathers fought for. So even if you believe that your vote doesn't count, or you're dissatisfied with the choices that you have in a particular election, I really look at voting as paying tribute to those who lived and fought so hard, who didn't have the right to vote. Now, I also firmly believe that the political process leaves a lot to be desired for people of color. And so I think that's a conversation that we can delve into, but our vote most certainly matters. Your vote was not given to you. Your vote was fought for and earned largely by a sacrifice that we didn't make. So I'm big on voter participation. I pride myself in not missing any election since I was 18.
Oh, wow.
Whether it be a primary, dog catcher, or whatever. I just can't imagine not going to a poll when I can look at people in my family who didn't have the opportunity of the franchise. So my vote matters. I vote early and I vote often.
Early and often, I like it. What about you, Eric?
I'm being from DC. I'm very careful about the vote counting aspect because of our lack of representation in Congress, our lack of representation absent of statehood. However, absolutely 100% categorically, our vote counts, every vote counts, what you do with your vote counts, and what you do after your vote counts. And if that wasn't the case, I know you didn't want to talk about voter suppression, but if that wasn't the case, they wouldn't be trying to subtract or extract votes if they didn't count. So there's no question, like nobody should be even contemplating whether or not your vote counts. It's did you vote or not?
If you're just tuning in, this is Ego, Everybody's Got One, a podcast about opinions. Today, we're talking Decision 2020, and does your vote really count? We want you to participate in the conversation as well. You can call us live right now at 410-822-3733. That's 410-822-3733 or 410-822-FREE, all righty? And also, we want you to share this because this is something that's very important. No, we are not talking celebrity gossip right now. No, we're not talking about love, sex, and relationships. We are talking about something that is very important, something that is going to affect us directly come November 3rd. So please make sure that you like this and you share it with your friends right here and right now. So I want to talk about why people believe that our vote doesn't count. Because there is the popular vote and there is the electoral college. And a lot of us don't understand it. And so people feel like I'm sitting here voting, but then you have some state that's, for whatever reason, a key state, and they have more power to put the person in power. And so a lot of people may feel like the Electoral College is a sham. So can someone break it down and explain what is the Electoral College? How does it work? And is it still relevant in today's society?
Well, I can jump in. I can jump in there if you guys don't mind.
Please.
Actually, when we go and vote on November 3rd, we're not really voting for Vice President Biden or President Trump. We're actually voting for a set of electors from our state. And so the Electoral College, you have the number of electoral votes or college votes that you have representatives in Congress. And so when you cast your vote on November the 3rd, in most states, you're actually voting for the number of electors that you will have for in the Electoral College. And so to say that that system is antiquated is an understatement. And I believe it's one of the most progressive conversations and reforms that we could have to talk about modernizing representation, whether it be how members of Congress are appropriated or how the Electoral College is executed. So, and we can get into that, but I believe that the Electoral College is outdated. I think that it marginalizes communities of color, and that's a conversation that we ought to be pushing, not just in election season, but really in between elections when so much of the critical work is done to move our voting system and really every system that governs our country forward.
And I just want to point out a fact. In 2016, Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by 2.9 million votes, but she lost the Electoral College by 76 votes. And I'm not a political scientist, but that just seems crazy to me when the American people basically elected Hillary Clinton, but she lost. And you can speak to that personally, Quincey, because you worked with her.
Yeah, it hurt your feelings. It hurt mine a lot more. But I think, you know, like I said, I wish more of these conversations would take place in between election cycles. I really wish that it would be a focus of not only the Congressional Black Caucus, but the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, because we are summarily marginalized by the Electoral College. And you know, it's hard. We talk about Donald Trump is the president right now, and he got his ass kicked. He did. Got his ass kicked by the majority of the American people, and we ought to be moving progressively towards one man, one vote, one woman, one vote. In actuality, and we're a long way from that.
I want to talk
I totally
now.
agree.
Go ahead.
I totally agree with Quincey, and even as an educator, someone who has to stand before 9th and 10th graders and teach them history and government and American government, which, you know, many of us thought were just the driest subjects. When we start to talk about the 270 electoral votes, I always use the students. I think using the real life example of what happened with Clinton and Trump helps them maybe shift their mindset a little more. But when I first did my introduction, I said I have a degree in history and government political science. To understand that there is truly a science behind who governs and who controls the power, and who is at the table, and who is at the conversations, and who deliberately are left out of the conversations is so important. So just to piggyback on what Quincey said, we have to understand the political science that happens. It is not until we understand that there are algorithms and there are measurements, and that we have to debunk the system in a real progressive and today way, we're never going to see a change. The system is hundreds of years old, and no one has come to the table and said, how do we, you know, defund and debunk this system?
How do you propose that we disseminate that information to the common everyday person? Because that's wonderful, and it's actually true. Like, that's what we need to be doing right now. But it just seems like the common everyday person that's worried about making ends meet, that's going to work, that's taking care of their families or whatever. How do we get that information to them?
Well, I think I think it's so, I'm sorry, go ahead, sis. Go ahead.
No, well, I'll make it really brief. I was going to say that, again, as an educator, I think most things start in the classroom. I won't date and age myself, but I can remember us taking citizenship tests. Okay. And there were certain conversations from, grade 1 up. So one way is reintroducing these elements into everyday learning. A second thing, what I did when I was on the campaign trail was show people, if you were receiving food stamps, if you had school-age children, if you had a parent who wasn't able to age in place, how all of those common everyday situations were directly tied to some political aspect. And so sometimes landing the plane for people who are going to work every day, who are just trying to make ends meet, showing them how political decisions directly impact their livelihood. Exactly. People would at least get the concepts. Quincy, I'm sorry.
No, you're good. I appreciate everything you said. I think it's very important what Tori, what Eric, and April, what you do for a living. I proudly say that I'm a hack, and I'm in this political bubble, and sometimes I can admit that I lose touch with sort of the regular conversations because my world is politics all the time. But I think it's important that we have people dedicated to moving in the community and moving in their space and really elevating the knowledge of our people. The stuff that Eric does in connecting folks to experiences, I think we ought to be pulling a part of political activism into that. That's why I'm so excited about what he does. Tori in the schools and in her community outreach. Yeah. I think these conversations have to be consistent. I think they have to be real. And I think you have to really break it down to the lowest common denominator. The reality of the situation is government touches every part of your life. You get a birth certificate and you get a death certificate. Those two things are government issued pieces of paper, so to speak. And it's important who is the register of wills in your community. It's important who your county council person. It is important who your school board member is. Just as important, if not more important, than who the president is at times. So I think we really have to be committed to using our platform and the spaces where we have authority to really elevating politics to not just a tangential conversation to making it day to day. It's got to be a primary part of the conversation about how you improve your life.
At this time, we have a call, so we're going to go to the phones. Hello?
Hello?
I can't hear the call.
Hello?
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 Hi, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
Fantastic. Thank you for calling Ego today. What's your name?
My name is Arena, but I go by Rain, so you can definitely call me Rain.
All right, Miss Rain, what is your question or comment?
So one of your questions you asked, well, the main basis of the show is, does your vote count? Now, the cynical part of me says not really. The logical, reasonable part of me says yes. And it's a two-part answer because I know someone mentioned earlier that black people should be honored to vote. It's just that in an arbitrary kind of way, black people should vote because people did die for us to have the right to vote. However, that's kind of two-sided because there are people who also died so that we could go to college or so that we can do other things. And a lot of us don't necessarily go those routes. So that part is like I'm a little shaky on. However, I am a registered voter. I do vote. I do understand that the electoral college, and the more people who vote, the electoral college has to go by the popular vote. So for that reason is why I would say our votes count. It's just that, as another panelist said, the way that the system is set up, it seems as though these votes really don't count because black people are disenfranchised just across the board in so many aspects in this country. So I would say 70% of me says the vote does count, 30% says, maybe.
Thank you so much, Rain. We appreciate you. And please make sure that you subscribe to the YouTube page and you also share this with your friends, all right?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Reigns.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye. Did you want to say something?
I
Go ahead.
actually wanted to piggyback on all three of those things. So in addition to every other hat I wear, I'm also I serve on a school board. I'm steeped in education. My son is grown now, but before the time when he was ready for kindergarten, I made it a point to be an active participant in not only his education, but the education for the community. I think that's an important entry point when it comes to civic engagement and everything else. But certainly, when I use the term rabble rouser, it's not lightly. I want to talk about compulsion for a second, because if you look at the things that have happened in this country, when they thought it necessary for men to be eligible for military service, they made it compulsory. So everybody, including myself 25 years ago, has to register for selective service, right? That is a mandate that could wipe out voter registration as we know it. We could literally register every eligible voter in this country by compulsion, so that voter registration was not even something on the table to argue anymore. That tide by itself, given the minority population that existed in it, because most of the population that thwarted Hillary Clinton's last campaign and thwarted Al Gore, and those are the only two, where you see the Electoral College really come into play. That's wiped out immediately if you flip the switch and have every eligible adult who is registered to vote. That eliminates so much suppression without any real cost outside of the administrative part. There just has not been the political will on either side of the aisle to get that done, because a lot of politics still is steeped in leverage and this chess match that exists within the Democratic and Republican parties trying to outmaneuver one another, which leaves a lot of us out in the cold when it comes to not just enfranchisement and voting, but education and activism. And so you see some voices that are allowed to kind of rise faster and louder than others. That's almost exclusively due to technology. Right? Like 20 years ago, this wasn't happening. The energy was there.
I'm gonna play devil's advocate for a minute. That sounds great. It would be wonderful if everybody registered to vote. But the American in me is kind of like, part of me is like, is that democratic? Is that American to make it mandatory that everybody register to vote? And then if you make it mandatory for everybody to vote, do you now make it mandatory that everybody has to vote? Because if it's my voice and I have a right to be unheard, to be heard, then I should have a right to be unheard as well. Do you see what I'm saying?
Well,
What do you think?
there are countries where compulsory voting is the law.
Yeah.
You're mandated to vote, and people ask all the time, does our vote matter? And I'll speak especially for the black vote. If it didn't matter, there wouldn't be so many people trying to make it so hard for us to vote.
Which is what Tori said earlier. Yeah.
The reality of the situation is this: even in the span of my professional career in politics, we've seen progressive reforms like early voting. I think this will be the fourth cycle in Maryland where we early vote. Same-day voter registration.
Yes.
We have seen a lot of progressive reforms put in place, and we still have a long way to go. My job at the DNC during the Obama administration was in voter protection, which was really, I went around the country trying to get voting reforms or make it easier for people to vote. And the reality of the situation is, one of my bosses at the time used to say, the system is really not about how we vote. This system is really about who can vote. And they don't want us to vote. And so we have to be so committed to not only showing up and voting, but also not resting on our laurels as to the fact that voting is the only thing that matters. There's voting, there is getting involved in the process, there is lobbying. There are so many ways that we can move our communities forward. And it's interesting, you know, Tori's on here, and I've heard so many great things about Tori, and to be a first-time candidate and to do so well in your election, sister, you are to be commended. One of the criticisms that I have, really, of all candidates, Republican, Democrat, or whatever, would be if we put the same level of energy into our campaigns as we put into organizing the community in between elections.
Wow.
Exactly.
You would not have to vote as much.
Yep.
Because the ills that affect our communities would be so much more improved if we, quote, kept that same energy when our name wasn't on the ballot, and just invest in our community just because it's the right thing to do.
I feel like
Oh,
you heard
my
my
goodness.
speech in the
thank you
mirror
for
this
that.
morning.
And it's funny that you mentioned the keeping the same energy. So that was actually a part of my reach to the community. And so if you go drive down North Avenue, just drive from Park Avenue to North and Hilton. Up North Avenue, you're going to need to take a mental health break. You're going to have PTSD. You're going to see bumps and lumps. You're going to see children running with not adequate clothes and shoes. You're going to see homelessness. You're going to see substance abuse. You're going to see all of these things. However, if you go up and down North Avenue, ask many of the residents or the neighbors in the community there, if they voted, they will tell you, nah, I don't have time for that. And so to keep that same energy is important. Not only is it bringing in pop culture and, relevant culture, and it's a colloquialism or a term that many people understand, but what we coined was, if you don't exercise your right to vote, you don't exercise your right to complain.
Exactly.
See, we have to understand that there's a propaganda. The media has told us two things about Black community. Three things. First, that Black people don't vote. Secondly, if Black people do vote, it is women and seniors. And thirdly, media says that Black men don't vote. But you just heard Eric say that you have to at least identify whether or not you're of a certain age, if you're willing to go into the military, able to be drafted, all of these things. It is a lie that we have bought into, that our voice does not matter. It is a lie, especially in a city like Baltimore, where the leadership is skin folk.
Yes.
That doesn't mean they're kinfolk.
Right.
And so we have gotten caught up in this Black leadership, Black politics. I'm a member of the Baltimore League of Women Voters, and I understand, again, being a history and government degree person, whatever, but going to an HBCU, that if it weren't for the white women in the suffrage movement, that myself, that April, that my mother, that Black women would not have been able to vote when we were, 42 years later? Because the 19th Amendment did not give Black women the right to vote, but the white women, the Black women did not have the right to vote with the suffrage movement, but the white women who pushed the envelope made a path for us. And so there's so many levels of this that if we had enough time to really pull back and do a deep dive, we have to first start with our thought process about voting and our voice and being included. Women have literally turned out more than men, but not in this large 30 or 40% that we've been told. I mean, we're talking 1% and 2% at times. And in 2012 and 2016, Quincey, you can tell me if I'm right, Black voters turned out in a lot of states more than white voters. Why is that not the narrative that we're pushing and that the media is pushing? Because they want us to be convinced that our vote doesn't matter. They want us to be convinced that our vote doesn't count and that we will stay home.
I have a call, but I do want to make this point to add to what you're saying. I just see contradictions because yes, people try to say that Black people don't vote or whatever, but when Hillary Clinton didn't win, I'm going to read like a little point here. It says during the 2016 election, if an additional 400,000 Blacks had voted in key states such as Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, Hillary Clinton would have won the election. But that makes it seem like Hillary Clinton didn't win because of Black people. So does our vote count? Are we at fault? Do we not vote? Which one is it? Because the narrative changes.
What's interesting about those states that you mentioned that can't be separated from this conversation. You have some of the most regressive voter participation laws in the country in some of those states. So it's not by happenstance. There are people who wake up every day whose job is to make it harder for people to vote. You find, and while we're talking, make it harder for folks to participate in the census.
Yes. Which is important because that deadline is coming up.
I'm in Atlanta right now, and I was having a meeting the other day, and this shocked me. In 2010, the last census in the state of Georgia, you had 42 census offices around the state. Barack Obama was the president. Now that Donald Trump is the president, you have 6.
Wow.
That's not accidental. That is intentional. No. So what I'm saying is that for all of the obstacles that are put in place to minimize the participation of all voters, especially people of color, we've got to be doubly committed to doing what we have to do to push through that bullshit.
That's right.
And we're going to talk more.
400,000 is less than a population in a city like Baltimore. So you're talking about, I think you may have listed 5 or 6 states. So we're talking 400,000 people. That's not a lot of people. When we start to look at the fact that Baltimore City, the size of Baltimore, is 600,000 people roughly. It's not a lot of people.
We're going to talk more about voter suppression, but I have a call.
In Baltimore for mayor in the primary, because the primary is all that matters. We've had elections in Baltimore where 20% of the population votes.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we have to fight systems. Yeah, we have to work like hell to make sure that the laws are as advantageous for us to participate. But on some level, you got to wake up and see you getting your ass kicked every day. You got to be willing to get involved in your own process.
I love it.
There is a corporate responsibility that we all have, but there's also an individual responsibility that we have to really give a damn about our own personal plight in life. And I'm cussing a lot, so excuse me.
You already started with the t-shirt, dude.
I meant to ask if we could curse before we started.
Yes, you can curse. You can curse.
To stick a pin in that, just
look
at the felonious incarceration rates in those same states and do the math, and you're going to see how suppression works even before an election ever begins. So before there's any candidate, before there's a Donald Trump, there's already suppression in place, because the felonious incarcerations that disenfranchise black men in particular, but black people as a whole, and brown people, if you do the calculus on that, you will find all the votes in the world that you need. So they're locking them up.
I love that I have such amazing guests that are full of so much knowledge, but I also want to make sure that I incorporate the callers, because we have had like some great participation as far as the phone calls, and I want to go to the caller right now. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, who is this?
Hi, this is Yolanda.
All right, Yolanda, what is your question or comment today?
Well, I actually had a comment. I was actually one of your mayoral candidates that went out there and actually tried to, change people's mind and vote. The thing is that we have to degross that thing from the 80s and the 90s, where the grandparents put it in their head that their votes don't count. And everybody that I actually talked to actually said, well, my grandmother don't vote, my mother don't vote, so what is the point of me voting because my vote don't count? My thing is that Barack Obama, just like you said, is the one that changed the narrative that shows you that your vote counts. So who are we actually supposed to be blaming? I told him we can't blame the politicians. We have to blame the voters for not getting out there and actually getting engaged in the process. But we also have to understand or understand that they took these things out of school for a reason. They took it out because they took civics out. They took government out. They took all this stuff out because they want to disenfranchise you on purpose. And they want you to pay for it in college. So actually, that's why you got so many college kids that come out here that sit up there and try to vote versus the ones who sit home, don't have a college degree or no enthusiasm about voting, because our politicians showed us every day that they don't care when they only come out every 4 years and ask for a vote. So the thing is that we have to connect back to the people and let them know that your vote is money. Your vote do count because that's how our money comes into our city.
All righty. Thank you so very much for that comment. Anybody want to address
You're
what she was
welcome.
talking about?
I mean, I want to address the local aspect because that is, I get that we're in a presidential election and it's exciting. It's weird because,
Very
he's a
weird.
fucking
It's very weird.
insane person that is at the helm, and then another person who's less insane who's trying to ascend to the helm, and it's political theater for sure. But
Definitely.
I mean, in between those elections, there's so many, smaller seats or local state races that matter so much more in your day-to-day living than anything that Donald Trump or Joe Biden could ever do or promise to do, or the federal landscape is what it is, and like it operates on a macro level. But politics, cliche aside, is local. And so if you're not engaged, not just voting, but engaged locally, you're losing locally. And so when it doesn't have to trickle down if it trickles up. If you're losing locally,
Right.
you're losing at the state, you're losing at the national level. You look at the national level and say, well, they're trying to keep us down. No, you're keeping yourself down because the low-hanging fruit you passed on. The easy election where you could get to know the candidates, where they wanted to knock on your door and sit down and talk to you. If you're not open and inviting to that, then you're setting yourself up for those larger macro losses.
Okay, we are running short on time. So I want to make sure that I get a real conversation in about voter suppression, because a lot of people hear it, you know what I'm saying? But I want to understand what is really taking place with voter suppression, because I'm looking at it and I'm reading things and it's taking me back to Jim Crow. I'm just like, is this really happening in 2020? Is this really happening? So can you talk about what are some of the tactics that are being used to suppress the black vote, and why is it allowed to happen? Like, how is that just taking place in districts, and it's un-American, it's undemocratic?
So I would say that, again, and Eric made a great point, understanding that politics is truly local. It is hard to have a national conversation with people who don't quite understand the local ramifications and implications just in their neighborhood, their 4x4 in their community. I have been calling for the resignation and removal of the Baltimore Board of Elections Director Jones for years. No one listened to what he admitted in 2016 when ballots were lost then. And then we saw in 2020 in the primary, many of us who had to, give concession speeches and concede in our election, we're talking about thousands of ballots not counted. And it was greater than just the pandemic. It was greater than just COVID. Some of these people who have been appointed into these positions are incompetent. They don't have the leadership skills. They don't have the integrity. The politicians are in their pockets and they're in the pockets of the politicians, and vice versa. And so I think there's a greater level of, yes, suppression is happening on a national level. We know that ballots are being, many people will not receive ballots. Many people don't understand the absentee or mail-in ballot process. We know that some people may not understand how to sign a ballot. Can you give it back to your mail carrier?
Right.
Which you can do. You don't have to take it to a mailbox. You can actually open your door and return it right to the mail carrier, and they're supposed to bring it back. But the system is not just broken on a larger level, it's broken in the local level.
Yes.
And so I think, based on what the caller just said, and I somewhat disagree with my grandparents said that we don't vote because we see seniors coming out to vote more so sometimes than the middle-aged voter. I think that it's all misinformation. And so right now you have a president who is spewing hate, who is saying from the presidential podium that the ballots are broken, that this process is broken, and that if he doesn't win, he's not going to have a peaceful transition of power.
How crazy is that?
Problem. And so I want to see the Democratic Party of my childhood and not this more polished, we're all together, we're taking the high road. That's cool sometimes. But sometimes you gotta knuck if you buck.
Yes. Come on,
Tori.
Tori.
They need to be having hearings right now, explaining to the American people that we're not just lowly Democrats and we're going to turn the other cheek. That's not the politics that's going to set any of us free. That's not the progressive politics that is going to be able to bring funding into, federal pots that then trickle down to our cities, that trickle down to our schools. And so, suppression could be a whole nother show. What I will say is this: anyone listening, educate yourself. I think it was Quincey who said it earlier, that there is a level of individual accountability that has to happen. Guys, listen, if you only need a 4th grade education to be able to understand this voting process, do not remove yourself from the table. Do not remove yourself from the conversation. Fill out your ballot early and hand it to the mail carrier. That's the least you could do.
I want to talk accuracy as well. Like, if they're losing ballots, how do we know? Once again, getting back to, does your vote really count? And I have to play devil's advocate because there are people out there thinking like this. When they're losing ballots, when people are getting mail-in ballots or whatever with the wrong name on it and the wrong registration number on it, how can we trust that if we mail in our ballot that it's actually going to be counted? How can we trust any of this with this system? So when people say this is political theater, when people say my vote doesn't count, I get it. I get it. So how do we fix this? How do we fix this?
The facts of this, while there are systematic things in place to make it harder to vote, the reality of the situation is, of all the things that this country does well, voting is one of them.
Okay.
Out of the hundreds of millions of votes that are counted, there was really negligible incidences of voter fraud in America. That's largely a Republican conservative myth that there's rampant voter fraud in America. It just happens to not be true. During the Bush administration, they did a deep dive into voter suppression. In reality, the situation is, out of hundreds of millions of votes cast, there were literally like 12 verifiable incidents of voter suppression. So, yes, have a healthy skepticism, but don't let that be the reason why you don't vote.
Why you don't vote. I got it. I want to talk about ex-convicts not being able to vote. What do you think about that? Because when I think about it, if a person has paid their debt to society, no matter what they did, if you have paid your debt to society, how can you truly and authentically reintegrate into society when you are still being punished for what you did by being denied that right to vote?
I think they should be able to still vote in prison. Not even serving your debt does not relinquish your citizenship. If voting is a function of citizenship and you are a citizen, you should be allowed, and a system should be created for you to vote, period. This is probably the biggest swath of disenfranchisement that they've been able to lean into, them being the Republicans for so long. And this is about control. Republicans for years, and I studied in the Leadership Institute, which is a Republican leaning or Republican organization that trains political operatives. I know they're crazy, too well. And so some of the things I heard were horrifying, but they were necessary for me to understand what I was getting into as a young adult. And that's one of them, right? The more people that they can discount, the easier it is for them to count their people, because the people that they want to vote are reliable. And if they had to take a big part of black and brown populations and take them off the board, the easiest way to do that is the prison system.
Yeah.
Period. That's not. They are more concerned with the voting apparatus than they are public safety or, you know, any kind of violence or whatever. I mean, you're talking about a large number of nonviolent offenders who have felonious charges that prevent them from voting.
And we only have about 5 minutes left, so I want to get to Tori and I want to get to Quincey and then start to wrap up.
I just want to say that again, this is why being an educated voter is important.
Yes.
Because it is not a truth in every situation that an ex-convict does not have the right to vote. It is not in every state that felons lose their right to vote.
Okay.
And so off top, I know in Maine, I know in Vermont, felons never lose their right to vote.
Okay.
In Quincey, 15, 16 states across the country, once the time is served, there is automatic restoration of the right to vote. And so what we have to be mindful is there are organizations right here in Maryland, right in Baltimore, the Maryland Justice Project, Out for Justice, One Baltimore, tons of Maryland the FACE organization, that their centralized focus, or their central focus, I should say, is on educating felons and ex-cons.
Awesome.
Because there is a myth that if I've been incarcerated, I can't vote. And so that alone excludes and removes a critical population of individuals from the voting process.
Yes.
Untruthfully and unfairly. And so one thing we were doing was making sure we had advocates using the Positive Impact group with Rennie Bass and some others, and Earl Young and Peanut King and Dennis Wise and Stokey and all of these different people who were my friends, who were people I look up to, who I knew growing up, to go into the jail and have the conversation so that our brothers and sisters knew what their rights were. And so it is a misnomer that if you have been in jail or if you are a felon across our country, again, we're talking federally, that you can't vote. You got to know what your situation is and what your state regulations and rules are. And if it's not an automatic restoration of your voting rights, how to get those voting rights restored.
Got it. Quincey, did you want to say something?
Not much to add other than if you're a citizen, you're a citizen. Some of the best organizing being done in Baltimore is around the refranchising of our ex-offender population. Shout out to people like Karen York, shout out to people like Nicole Hansen at Out for Justice, who are really leaders in that space.
Awesome. So we only have a few more minutes left, and I want to just give everybody a little brief moment to make your appeal to African Americans right now who are watching about why they need to vote.
No appeal. 100%. Make sure you're registered by your state's deadline.
October 13th for
Make sure
Maryland,
you vote.
DC.
I don't care who you vote for. Make sure you vote. And then make sure you do something afterwards. That's it. If you are continuous, change will come. But if you show up and pull a lever or press a button and then think magic is going to happen, you're delusional.
Tori?
My appeal to everyone is, if you don't do it for your grandparents and those people who died and struggled for us to have the right, you do it for those children in your house, those young people in your family, the young people in your community who deserve a better tomorrow. And so for me, nothing I do is for me, it is for my children's children. And so I'm asking everyone to put your own personal differences or skepticism aside and exercise the right to vote for the children and the generation to come. And if you don't know where to start, please reach out to anyone. You can reach out to any of the panelists here, to April. You can go online. We all have the same uncle. It's not Uncle Sam, it's Uncle Google. And you're welcome to go to Google and find out for yourself. Please exercise the right to vote, because if you don't vote, you don't have the right to complain.
And last but not least, Quincey.
I want to be very profound and just say, cut the bullshit. Seriously, like, there is so much at stake in this election and every election. Our communities need so much. And step one is having a voice in the folks who represent us. I always like to refer to the vote as just one tool in the toolkit. And that toolkit has to include activism. It has to include education. It has to include so many things. But the reality is we are about a month away, 40-something days away from an election. And we literally have a person in charge of the federal government who is an active white supremacist.
Active white supremacist.
Who is really trying to, and honestly, even though my shirt says fuck Trump, Trump is just a linchpin in a system fundamentally reshaping the court. Do you realize that Donald Trump is a few weeks away from being one of the only presidents in decades to have 3 people appointed to the Supreme Court?
It's crazy.
That means so much
to
people of color, to women. And so the reality of the situation is we could use a lot of flowery terms. If you wake up every day and you look out your window, or you call your grandma, or you have a cousin, or you have somebody on the block, and you know their lives can be improved, grab them and take them to the polls with you.
That's right.
And really just cut the excuses. Do we have perfect choices in this election? No, we don't. But the reality of the situation is we can't afford to sit this one down. So I wish I could say it more eloquently, but seriously, like, cut the shit. Let's go.
Thank you so very much, Quincy. Thank you, Tori. And thank you, Eric. I wish we had more time to talk, but we do not. We are going to wrap up today's show, and I do want to make my appeal to you. Your vote is your voice. And I want you to think about running around talking to everybody, running around screaming at the top of your lungs, but no one can hear what you're saying. That's what happens when you complain, but you didn't vote. So I would really encourage you to be heard, to stand up, to exercise your voice by exercising your vote. But then after that, you can't just stop there. You do have to be politically active. You have to be educated, and you have to hold your leaders accountable. And we're not just talking about on the national level. We are talking about on the local level. You have to know who your council person is. You have to know who your register of wills is. You have to know all of those things, and you have to keep your knees. Well, I don't want to say that because that's just like a bad pun, but you really need to hold them accountable. So thank you so much. Don't forget, in Maryland and DC, the deadline for voter registration is October 13th. You can do it in person. You can do it online. You can also mail it in. But whatever you do, get registered, and don't just get registered. Make sure you vote. Stand up and be heard. We love you. God bless you. Good night.
Y'all keep pushing.
All right.
That's right.